This is me, Spoon Beast.
Newcomers, newcomers, newcomers. They are, without question, the biggest draw to every Super Smash Bros. Game. They're the reason we take a look at the official website of the game every day in anticipation. And back in the Brawl days, they were the reason I ever started to do YouTube videos in the first place. Also, when it comes to buying this game and getting a new console for it in the process, the cast of Newcomers has to be strong enough to sell me to get both. So, without further ado, let's get into my personal top choices for new coming Nintendo stars into the 4th Smash Bros. Roster. We're going to start with what I shall call the honorable mentions. The reason I'm listing them under this label is, well, I don't think they have much of a shot at all. I can't be biased just because I fancy them, you know? So on to our first character of the honorable mentions, we have Vaati, from The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventure, and the Minish Cap. Vaati is the main villain win mage from these games, and would make for quite an interesting member of the roster. They could play his abilities as a mage at the wind, and even take advantage of shapeshifting, like his most well-known form, which is that of the Black Orb. I mean, wouldn't giving Toon Link an adversary be a whole lot better than just needlessly shoving in a Toon Zelda or Toon Ganondorf? It's really unlikely, but surely it'd be better and a ton more creative on the developer's part. This all seems very moot, though, because if The Legend of Zelda is getting a 5th roster representative, it's going to be Girahim. The reason I say this is because off of Rosalina's recent confirmation, it seems as though that the franchise characters who have a good amount of hype and recent popularity are going to be a priority. Girahim, whether he was a secondary villain or not in Skyward Sword, seems to be the Zelda character who has the most momentum at this point in time. And considering he's a Lord of Demons, there's a lot of potential in such a character choice. Again, for me, I would prefer Vaati. The final member of my honorary mentions club is none other than Bowser Jr., which again, I will go back and mention, because of Rosalina's inclusion, it's pretty well the end of Bowser Jr.'s possible inclusion. 5 characters is well more than enough for a franchise in Smash Bros. I just don't see them stacking 6 or more characters for the series that are represented in the game. I mean, they very well could, but it seems like overkill, even if the series represented just so happens to be Mario. I've always seen big potential in Bowser Jr. I think him being a smaller, agile version of Bowser just works, honestly. They could even use that magical brush of his from Mario Sunshine and incorporate it for combat. Perhaps a Shadow Mario transformation? I know, might be a bit of a stretch on that idea, but it'd still be awesome. But again, as much as I love the guy and think he'd be one of the best villains to include, 6 characters seems far too much for any franchise in Smash Bros. Moving on, we now move on to characters I'd like to see who, in my mind, fare a far more better shot at making the Smash 4 roster, and aren't totally crazy like half of the insert anime characters here list you see all over the place. But anyways, let me introduce you to the one and only Shulk from Xenoblade Chronicles. Being the main star of a fairly recent and extremely popular RPG that's exclusive for the Wii, I would say gives you pretty good odds if you're Shulk. Beyond that, though, his potential as an actual fighter is great. Character who's very combo heavy in his attacks and moves swiftly. Cool and badass looking. Even with his dashing attire, I think he'd just work. Also, from a biased point of view, it's the closest thing to a Square character we're going to get, you know, without him actually having to be a Square Enix character. Trust me when I say that I don't think he's a shoo-in, but he does have a better chance than a good many characters. An attribute that he has going for him, which was mentioned earlier in this video with Girahim and in past videos with Mewtwo, is his recent and current popularity. Most of the time when a Smash game is in the midst of development, that's all they look for. Next up on my list of newcomers, we have Dillon, from none other than Dillon's Rolling Western. The Lone Ranger Armadillo seems like a perfect character to help out with the whole "it's coming out on the 3DS too" thing. I feel they should have characters to help represent that console on the game's roster. I mean, the roster already features Wii Fit Trainer, whose claim to fame is only, well, Wii Fit, which clearly is a non-3DS game, but she's appearing on the Smash 3DS roster, so why not feature Dillon in the same way? as in add a character who has only appeared on the 3DS on the roster that will be featured in both versions of the game. I would limit how much he uses the armadillo roll move, similar to how Yoshi uses his rolling egg. Why do you ask? Because we also have Sonic on this roster who has an entire moveset based around his ball and spin dash attacks. So we have to differentiate here. I would have him use various different weapons that he uses in the Rolling Western games, such as tossing around crystal bombs, and maybe even use a good old-fashioned draw, though that might be best served as a final smash. In his usual actual series, he does rely on his rolling strikes a fair share, though. And with that, it does kind of conflict on him fighting differently for the Smash roster. Furthermore, it does kind of take away his chances of being playable with him practically playing out like Sonic, but I'm sure they would work the mechanics differently so that Dillon would play out differently than the Blue Hedgehog. Or so we can hope. Now this portion of the video are two characters I personally would like to see the most. Neither one ranks higher than the other in this regard. They're both two mainstay Nintendo legends who were ironically both snubbed from the Brawl roster and made into two different NPC roles instead. So if you haven't caught on with all these hints yet, of course the two characters I'm referring to are Ridley and Little Mac. Ridley being reduced to a mere boss in the Subspace Emissary in Brawl, and of course Little Mac had the displeasure of being nothing more than an assist trophy. These two have been highly requested characters for a while now, and were among the top requested for Brawl. Since the release of Brawl, however, Little Mac's series Punch-Out! Was given a major resurgence on the Wii, while Ridley had a repackaging of sorts with his clone form in Metroid Other M, which gives these two a whole new slew of credibility now than in comparison to the days of Brawl. An evil clawing dragon and an actual boxer seem like natural fits to the Smash Bros. Roster to me. Please, don't use arguments against size, in Ridley's case of being too big, or Little Mac's case for being too small. To me, size isn't a factor for these rosters, as characters will always be scaled accordingly. Here's looking at you, Bowser and Olimar. Also, to further Little Mac's case a bit more, the guy was actually from a game that centered around boxing. In other words, fighting. Naturally, a character gifted in the art of fighting to defend himself certainly makes sense and gives him some extra credit, doesn't it? As always, guys, it'd be greatly appreciated if you were to follow me on the Facebooks, Twitters, and Instagrams of the world. These social media outlets are always a great way of staying connected to me in between all of my YouTube activity. Also, do feel free to drop a comment on this video on my channel, or hell, even add me up on Skype to discuss all things gaming and even give off a few requests. On that note, I am a frequent co-host of the I Got Gameplay podcast for Fanboys Anonymous. It airs live every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope to see you all there, and have a good one, folks.